Many of you got a piece of paper like this when you came in tonight. If you didn't get a piece of paper and you'd like one, I hope you'll raise your hand. One of the young men will try to see that you get one. This is the answer sheet for tonight. You'll notice there's lots of blanks on it. That's for you to fill in the answers. There's an acronym down the side, I DARE. And it comes from the statement that Joshua made. When he said, really it comes from the song we sing, dare to stand like Joshua. And so it's a declaration, I dare to stand like Joshua. So I hope you get a copy of this piece of paper. If not, just use any paper you've got. That'll be fine. A grocery store manager needed to hire an assistant manager. He had an office, like you see in the back of grocery stores, up above the sales floor. He could look down and see everything. And he arranged it so that when each applicant came in the store, he had to walk down a specific aisle to get to the back of the store to come for his interview. And he always arranged there's something to be wrong in that aisle. It might be a can on the floor like it had fallen off the shelf. It might be a piece of trash. But he would look and observe as the applicant came down the aisle to see what he would do. The principle that he applied is very simple. A person who is faithful in something that's small tends to be faithful in much bigger things. And isn't that true of the parable of the 10 minas? You remember the parable of 10 minas? The man had servants, and he gave to each one a mina. And he asked them to invest it for him. And when he called them to account, the one person had used that mina to get 10 other minas. And the master said, well done, good and faithful servant, for you have been faithful in a small thing. Actually, it says a very small thing. I will set you over 10 cities. And so that principle, the one who is faithful in something small tends to be faithful in bigger things. I want you to think and consider about being faithful in the small things. I think we have a tendency sometimes to think, when something big comes along, I will prove myself. I will show what I'm made of. But if we don't practice the small things, if we don't pay attention to the small things, how are we going to be ready when something big comes along? So I don't want us to neglect the small things. We need to be ready for them. So surviving temptation, the I on your piece of paper stands for identifying sin and temptation. This might seem like a small thing. After all, we know what sin is, don't we? And we usually know when we're being tempted, don't we? We think we do. Let me ask you a question. In identifying sin and temptation, what's your first reaction if you're offered a free plasma TV? You can just feel that desire jump up in your gut. Plasma. What's happening to us? What's happening to us? Things like this create a desire. What's your first reaction when you see a free $100 gift certificate to the store of your choice? Now, about the TV, if I ask most of you, did it raise a desire in you? I think most people would probably say, well, it did. Why is that? Don't you have a TV at home? Well, yeah. But it's not plasma. But isn't it sufficient? Doesn't it do the job? Well, yeah. Do you need a new TV? Well, no, not really. Well, why did you desire it? It's free. Isn't it that desire that just grabs us? Advertisers know that. They spend a lot of money coming up with these phrases. Something free. We don't think of ourselves as being tempted to be greedy. And yet, when you look at the dictionary definition of greed, it's very interesting. It's an excessive desire to acquire or possess more than one needs or deserves. Now, if something's given away free, most of the time you'd have to say, well, no, I didn't work for that. I don't deserve that. You got to acknowledge that there's a temptation here that's very devious. My mother used to tell me, don't ever want something for nothing. Why is that? Because When you desire something for nothing, you fall victim to temptations like this. And so we have to be very careful. You might think that advertisements don't affect you, but you'd probably be wrong. Companies spend a lot of money. Well-written ads appeal to envy, pride, greed. You don't want to be the last one on the block to get something. You've got to keep up with your neighbors. Television ads, radio ads, internet, newspaper, magazines, billboards bombard us. You can't be happy unless you've got this thing. After all, you're worth it. They've got a lot of appeals. We learn to recognize that a lot of advertising is deceptive. You look around and there are statements that you just know aren't true. See ads on the internet. Rental cars, $5.99 a day. You know that's not true. There's an asterisk somewhere in there, isn't there? And you look for it. You've been burned a few times, you start looking for that asterisk. It's such a joke in the industry, guess what? You see ads like this on the TV. Asterisk hunters. People make fun of it. Look at the competition. Guess what? They've got asterisks. What does that mean? They're hiding stuff from you. It's deceptive. Advertisements are very deceptive. There was a big gimmick, I remember, 10, 15 years ago, long-distance slamming. They would offer free merchandise, and when you signed up, there was a footprint somewhere that says, I hereby authorize my long-distance service to be changed. People never read the fine print. Something's free. They fell for it. It was a big problem. Here's the thing. The same tactics that advertisers use on us, Satan uses. Deceptive advertising. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He talks about men who are false apostles. Paul writes to the Corinthians and says, these are deceitful workmen masquerading as apostles of Christ, and don't be surprised. It's no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. He pretends to be something good. And it's not surprising then if his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness also. It's sin that advertises, this is good for you. There are no truth in advertisement laws with regard to Satan. You won't see those asterisks or those footnotes. It's just pure deception. Sin advertises good things. The end result, it's always not what is being advertised. Here's the thing. When you look at TV in today's society, you might think this is an entertaining show. You may not be aware that there's a very subtle message hidden in the storyline. What do you see when you look at TV? You see people living in immoral situations. You see people being unkind, cruel. And guess what? At the end of the show, everybody's happy, everybody's fulfilled. It's a good life. Those that are Christians are portrayed as ridiculous. This is a very subtle message that creeps through our advertisements in television shows. And so, parents recognize this danger. What is being advertised on the TV show, though it's a dialogue, though it's a show and not an ad, what is being advertised is the good life is a life where you have things. The good life is where you have fun with no inhibitions, no restraints. That's what is advertised as the good life. It's a deception. It's just not true. And yet, there it is. Parents recognize this danger and they try to control what their kids watch. A danger is that a lot of parents have the television in the kids' bedroom where there are no regulations and no restraints. It's a significant danger. But parents, let me ask you this. When the kids go to bed and it's just you, what are you watching? Are you watching Sex and the City? Maybe you've been enticed to watch this new show by CBS called Swingtown. Maybe you've seen the ads. It sounds exciting. The premiere episode actually advertises that the Millers find that their promiscuous neighbors provide excitement to their marriage. This is going to sound good to a lot of people. Excitement to the marriage. If somebody is in a marriage that they think is kind of You know, we've been married 10, 15 years. Things are kind of boring now. Excitement's going to spice things up. And you know what? If we can spice up our marriage and keep it intact, isn't that a good thing? Isn't excitement a good thing? Very deceptive message. If you want excitement, go jump off a tall building. Life will become very exciting for a short period of time. The end result will be very much destructive, just like this. This kind of excitement that sin entices with is very destructive, but it's advertised as good. It's advertised as something that's good for you. Satan's deception is a problem for us, and sometimes it's a problem just to identify the temptations that are put in front of us. Proverbs 6 says, "For on account of a harlot one is reduced to a loaf of bread, and adulteress hunts for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom, and his clothes be not burned? Can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched?" It's a pretty easy answer. No, he can't do that. So is the one who goes into his neighbor's wife. The one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. Here's the barb for sin. It advertises itself as something pleasurable, something good. The end result is always bad. In this deceptive advertising, one of the things that is such a problem for people is how they look at the temptation. Proverbs 23 says, "Do not gaze at wine when it's red, when it sparkles in the cup, and when it goes down smoothly." You notice alcohol commercials on your television? When they pour the beer, what does it look like? It's sparkling. It's full of bubbles. It's got a head. It's attractive looking. Maybe it's got ice cold around it. Refreshing. The writer of Proverbs says, don't look at sin when it looks attractive. Why not? It's a tremendous temptation. Don't look at it. How should you look at it? Look at this. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights. Your minds will imagine confusing things. You will be like one sleeping on the high seas, lying on top of the rigging. They hit me, you will say, but I'm not hurt. They beat me and I don't feel it. When will I wake up so I can get another drink? In the end, it bites like a viper. It's addictive. Nobody I know of goes and takes a drink thinking, I want to become addicted. I want to be a drunk. But that's the temptation. If you don't look at the negative consequences, the temptation is, this is good for you. This is attractive. Don't look at alcohol when it sparkles, when it looks good. Look at the end result. Identify that's a temptation and flee from it. Consider what the world advertises and how it may affect your children. Here's a recent article in our Orlando Sentinel called Trolling for Trouble in MySpace. MySpace is an internet website where it's just one of those social sites. Kids often have accounts there, and sometimes kids have more than one account, one that they show to their parents and one that they don't show to their parents. In this article, Trolling for Trouble on MySpace, it talks about a big problem in society. Young girls as young as 12 are pretending to be 19 and looking for encounters with men over the internet. The person who writes the article is it tries to figure out what causes this. What tempts these girls to do these things? One of the conclusions is peer pressure is strong. 2007 report by the American Psychological Association found that the proliferation of sexualized images of girls and young women in advertising, merchandising, and media is harmful to girls' self-image and healthy development. No surprise there, is it? I imagine they paid a lot of money to have that report published. But that's no surprise. We understand advertising is deceptive. What promises is good is not good. Super Bowl ads. This watchdog group talked about Super Bowl ads that they fuel underage drinking. New research published last month in the American Medical Association Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine shows that the more young people are exposed to alcohol advertising, the more likely they are to drink. Ads affect us, all of us, not just adolescents, not just young people, all of us. We need to be aware of the temptations surrounding us. What about that one? This guy looks happy, doesn't he? How could you not win $1 million and be happy? I mean, it's common sense. You win $1 million, you're going to be happy, right? Luke chapter 12. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. How many people read that and say, yeah, but $1 million? Come on. And yet, in a place like Forbes, you see an article like this: money will not buy you happiness. And what is summarized in this thing as a conclusion is lottery winners, even the big ones, return to their previous level of happiness within 5 years. It's a short-term happiness. Money and things, sin, promises, great happiness, they do not deliver. It's a deceptive advertising. So an action plan. We need to develop sales resistance. Not just for people who advertise goods and services. We need to develop advertising resistance, sales resistance to the tactics of Satan. Action plan. We need to develop that resistance. If ads stir up desires in us, throw them out. If we look at, likewise, practice the same technique with Satan. Philippians, Paul wrote and said, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. We need to learn that secret. We need to learn to be content with the good things that God provides and not those deceptions that Satan promises. We need to develop sales resistance to Satan's deceptions. It starts with identifying temptations that are all around us, even those that we may not be paying careful attention to. Homework, what I'd like you to do on your paper is when you watch TV the next time, if you watch TV, somebody told me coming in, I don't have a TV. That's fine. Maybe it's in books. Maybe it's on the radio. Pick your media. When you look around at the media that reaches you, look for subtle messages that bear out a deceptive message about worldly practices and write it down. Think about it and talk to your children, talk to your spouse, talk to another Christian about the subtle message and how you can help each other combat that deceptive message. You know, the bottom line is, if we can write it down and verbalize it, we're going to build awareness. And if we can build awareness in identifying temptation, we're ready to flee from it. So look around, find the messages, and discuss it with others. Share ideas about how to combat these things. So our first goal is to identify sin and temptation and to flee from it. When you read the New Testament, it has a number of things to say about fleeing. For instance, 1 Corinthians 6, flee from sexual immorality. Not just avoid it, flee. See it and run. 1 Corinthians 10, flee from idolatry. Here's one that I think hits us all where we live. 1 Timothy chapter 6. Paul would say, people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap. And I think every time we see that free, win big money, and we feel that attraction, we're being tempted. Don't ignore it. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs, but you, O man of God, flee from all of this. Identify it and flee. And also flee youthful lusts. Our first line of defense is to identify sin as deceptions and flee them. If you see deception in the media that can affect you and your family, just avoid it. If you see that in TV shows, turn them off. Minimize your temptation by controlling your environment. And strength comes from exercise. The writer of Hebrews said in chapter 5, verse 14, strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern between good and evil. If we don't exercise our senses, we're not prepared to discern good and evil. And people struggle with that. I see that at work when we have our annual ethics exercises. We have dilemmas, and people struggle with choices. If we don't exercise, how are we prepared? Have you ever thought of church as being like a spiritual gymnasium? Here's a place we can come to not only get nourishment, but also exercise our ability to determine right and wrong. Solid food is for the mature who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. We need to constantly, even in the small things, train ourselves. Remember, first step, identify and flee. Number 2, decide. The D is for decide. The worst time to make a decision about what we're going to do is in the middle of a temptation. That's when things are the strongest. It's kind of like if you've ever been in a high-pressure sales situation. You know the phrases. Available today, today only, special price. You're worth it. This is for you. High-pressure sales, that's what Satan excels at. If you wait until the middle of that high pressure to make your decision, it's really hard. So, the time to make a decision is beforehand. This is kind of what Job was saying in chapter 31 when he said, I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully upon a girl. What's Job saying? He's saying, I've made a decision. I'm not going to engage in sexual immorality. And that decision says, I am not interested in looking at a woman this way. Why? Very simple. He says, what is man's lot from God, his heritage from the Almighty on high? Is it not ruin for the wicked, disaster for those who do wrong? Look out at the end result of actions. Those that look lustfully at women and desire to go into sexual immorality, the end is destruction. Job says, I see that end. I don't like it. I don't want any part of it. I've made a decision early on. Think about Joshua and the 12 spies. They went into the land of Canaan to spy out the land. Can you imagine Joshua going into the land of Canaan, and he's got a little tally sheet, he's got a little clipboard, and he pulls out his tally sheet, and he'll say, okay, I see they've got this many men, we've got this many. And he comes back and he says, okay, guys, I've tallied it up. I think we can win this one. Doesn't sound like Joshua at all, does it? I believe that when Joshua went into the land, his decision was already made before he saw the first thing that they had. It wasn't a matter of how many. For 10 of the spies, it was a matter of let's assess what it is. For Joshua and Caleb, I believe it was more of I see the great things that God has prepared for us. This is wonderful. Victory is ours. The victory was determined by God, not by them. Get open your Bibles, and I'd like you to pay special attention to Ephesians chapter 1. We need to have that mindset that our decision is made in advance. If our decision is made in advance, when the temptation comes, it's a whole lot easier. Ephesians chapter 1, starting in verse 15. Paul writes and says, Therefore I also, after I heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love for all the saints, do not cease to give thanks for you, making mention of you in my prayers. What's Paul asking for these people in his prayers? Verse 17, that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give to you the spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him. I want you to have wisdom and knowledge in something that's very important. He says, verse 18, that the eyes of your understanding being enlightened. I want you to understand something that's important. That you may know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance, the good things God has planned. And what is the exceeding greatness of his power. I want you to understand the power that God has toward us who believe. What kind of power is that, Paul? He says it's according to the working of his mighty power which he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead. What greater demonstration of God's power do we have than when he raised Jesus Christ from the dead? Paul says, I want you to understand that God's power working on your behalf is like that. It's the same power. God can provide us victory, but we've got to decide whose side we're on right up front. Remember Joseph, propositioned by Potiphar's wife. Can you imagine Joseph standing there, and we just kind of freeze frame Joseph, and what's running through his mind? And maybe he's thinking, I wonder if I can get away with this. You know, she's a powerful woman, and if I reject her, she can do me great harm. Maybe nobody will know. Maybe nobody will know. You can't imagine that going through Joseph's mind, can you? His decision was made up. He didn't have to think about it. When she made her proposal, he identified it and fled. Why? Simple. His decision was already made. How do you come to those kind of decisions? You've got to look long term. What are the consequences of sin? You can go, take your credit cards, spend $10,000 and have a great time. You can travel, you can buy that plasma TV. But when the bills come due and you can't pay them, what happens? Bankruptcy. That's what happens when we give in to the sin of Satan. The spiritual cost is moral bankruptcy, separation from God. If we don't focus on that and make our decision in advance, we're in trouble. And so for homework, look for consequences. This is a wonderful exercise. Maybe in your newspaper, maybe in your television, maybe in books. Look around. You will find, even in a world that idolizes pleasure, that there are consequences to bad behavior. You will find them. When you see them, share them with family members, fellow Christians. Share ideas about how to avoid these kind of destructions, how we can prepare ourselves in advance. So, look for these things. They're there. Share them with your children. And you know, when you talk to your children, we don't have to talk to our children in a see I told you so manner. We don't have to tell them, you know, if you get involved in these things, here are the consequences. All we've got to do is kind of share them with them. They can reach their own conclusion because the answer is pretty obvious. Nobody wants destruction. If you see that this pathway leads to destruction, you're going to know that's not the path for me. So, another thing to do is to anticipate. The A is for anticipate. Part of the problem with temptation is it sometimes catches us unawares. We're not looking for it. We're not paying attention, and boom, there it is. It's right in front of us. What would you think about somebody who said, I'm going to go enter a tennis competition, but you know, I don't really like to practice? You'd say, that's kind of crazy. It doesn't make sense to get involved in something like that without preparation. And yet, we're like that with sin sometimes. We just go into it with no preparation. So, I'd like you to pick one of these four things and just make an effort this week. Maybe take your piece of paper and put it in a place where it's easy to find, where you can remember it, and work on one of these. Practicing of self-denial. How do we do that? One is our tongues. When somebody says something unkind to you, how do you react? We know what the temptation is. The temptation is to react in a way that's unkind, like versus like. You're mean to me, I'm mean to you. Part of our problem is we don't think about it. And so we say things that we're sorry about later, but we just didn't think. We reacted quickly. I can distinctly remember at somewhere around the age of 12 to 14 thinking, you know, presidents and old people, they must think really slow because they talk slow. What I didn't realize at the time, and I've come to learn, is that presidents and older people have learned the meaning of Proverbs 29:20. Proverbs 29:20 says, do you see a man who speaks in haste? There's more hope for a fool than him. When we learn to talk quickly, we get into a lot of problems. And if you look at TV shows, you'll see being able to talk quickly is glorified. In fact, the quicker you can retort, the quicker you can return a barb, the more sophisticated you are, the better off you are. Real life is not like that. It's just the opposite. When we talk fastly and don't think about what we're saying, we get ourselves into all kinds of trouble. Number one thing, try talking slower. Try delaying when you react. When somebody says something unkind, give it a minute. Give it some thought before you react. Practice saying no to pleasure. This doesn't come across as being very popular. God gave us things to enjoy. Why would you ever say, don't enjoy something? Very simple. We have probably all experienced in one way or another some sort of pleasure that, left unrestrained, causes problems. I've known people that just love soft drinks. And they might have 2 or 3 a day. All of a sudden they put on 25 pounds. And they've come to realize, if I don't restrain pleasure, it can have negative consequences. And that's true, not only in weight control, but other ways as well. I'm suggesting consider fasting. If you're in otherwise good health, I understand that some are on medication, some have diabetes and conditions, but if you're in good health otherwise, consider fasting. Why fasting? It's a basic denial of pleasure for a purpose. When you look at fasting in the Bible, what was the purpose? If you go back to Isaiah 58, when God talks about the kind of fast that He's pleased with, He was not pleased with their fast of the Jews that He was talking to, because their fasts were a show. They used their fast as an opportunity for their own pleasures. The fast that God says is acceptable to Him is a denial of pleasure in order to accomplish a greater good. He says, what is acceptable to me on the day of your fast is helping the widow, helping the helpless, helping the afflicted, helping others, being focused on others. Our society builds such an anticipation of pleasure. It's all about me. It's all about my pleasure. Pleasure is the end result of everything that's good. God says, you know what? If you're centered on yourself, you're not accomplishing my purposes, because my purposes is seeing about my affairs. And I want you to be concerned about others. Place others above yourself. How can we do that unless we deny ourselves from time to time? Fasting is one way. There are other ways. Avoid self-centered speech. How many times when you get into a conversation do you wind up talking about yourself more than anything else? That's something we all fall into. Practice spending a whole day never talking about yourself in any conversation. Practice for a whole day in conversations only asking about somebody else. How are you doing? What can I do to help you? How are things going in your life? When we focus on others, we're accomplishing the mission, part of the mission that God has set forth for us. So avoid self-centered speech. Avoid retaliation. When somebody's mean to us, let's don't be mean back. Spend a whole day thinking about that. If we will work on these small things, when the big temptations come, we're going to be ready because we've anticipated the ways that Satan tempts us, and we'll be ready. Pick on something, write it down, remember it, and work on it. The R is for remember. There are some things that we need to remember. If you do a word search in the New Testament on remember, you'll find verses like this. Remember Lot's wife. There's a message there. Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. If you seek to save the earthly things in this life, you're going to lose out. If you're willing to give them up, if you're willing to give up your search for pleasure as the end God, and you're willing to go along God's path, you can preserve your life. That's a powerful thing to remember. In other words, when you are tempted, look at the end result. Remember the end result of sin. Israel, Jude chapter 1. I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, otherwise destroyed them that believe not. Yes, you're a Christian, and yes, you're saved. But you know what? Even as a believer who is saved and has security, you can choose to turn around and defy God and face the same kind of destruction that the Israelites did. Remember, the wages of sin are death. I don't think we can emphasize that one too much. We just need to remember that. And you know what? There's a lot of verses like this. And so your homework, pick out a verse or 2 or 3 and commit them to memory. It's hard to remember something you've never learned. It's hard to remember something you never spent time on. Spend some time committing to memory. some verses, key verses that will help you so that when temptation comes, like Jesus, you can say, it is written. Remember God's ways. Pick 3 verses that emphasize the judgments of God, the consequences of sin, the benefits of being in Christ. Commit them to memory and remember them from time to time. The E is for exercise. We can exercise daily things that are important. A couple of verses that are quick. Philippians chapter 4. We read that this morning. I'd like you to take another look at it. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, good report, if there's any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. And I think we look at that verse and we think, oh yeah, okay, I should just mentally contemplate and think about these things. And yet, when you go look at the Greek, this word, and I've given you the Greek there, what it means is to take an inventory. We need to assess ourselves daily. These things that are good, do I have them? What am I doing? Take an inventory. What's happening in your life? Another passage I want to call your attention to is 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. He says, besides all this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity. These are all things we ought to have. And he says, if these things be in you and abound, they will make you neither barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you want to be useful in the kingdom, he says, here are some things to think about. You need to have these in abound. And I think we get kind of sidetracked on that word abound. Because you look up abound in the dictionary, it means fill to the full, overflowing. Okay, so I got to have that level of these things? I got to be full and overflowing before I'm useful? I don't think that's what he's saying. And the reason I say that is, if you look again at the Greek, that Greek word for abound, pleonazo, it means to do, make, or be more. That is, to increase. Now, it can mean by extension to superabound, that is, to have over. But its primary meaning is to increase. And so the idea, like in 1 Thessalonians, may the Lord make your love increase, pleonazo. And when he uses overflow, he uses another word. So you want to be useful in God's kingdom? Look at all these things. Do you have them? Are you growing? We need to take an inventory. Where am I going? Because if I'm growing, I'm headed the right way. And if I'm growing, I'm useful to God. If I'm not growing, I'm not useful. We need to take inventory. Daily exercise. Do I have these attributes and am I working on them? You go to the gym, what do? I need to work on my arms. You got a list. I need to work on my legs. You got a list. Make yourself a list of things to work on. I need to work on gentleness. I need to work on kindness. I need to work on brotherly love. Let's make a list and let's work on them. Daily exercise, some things you can do. Think of a situation in which you typically react maybe emotionally out of control, maybe selfishly without concern for others, maybe impulsively. I just didn't even think about it. Things that I could use these kind of attributes of gentleness, kindness, brotherly love, and use them to increase. Make a list. Anticipate opportunities to do this. In other words, not only anticipate, but make opportunities. Put yourself into situations where you can exercise these things. So, to summarize, let's identify temptation. First order, flee from it. Second, let's make a decision for God. We know his power. Let's just make a decision right up front. This is the pathway I'm going down. Let's look at the end result. See what the end result of our actions is and take action to go down that path. Let's make a decision up front. So when temptation comes, we've already made that decision. Let's anticipate opportunities. Let's remember not only the power of God, let's remember the power of prayer. Let's remember to pray and ask for God's help because he will give it, and it's great power. And let's remember to exercise. Prepare ourselves for God's service. Prepare to make ourselves useful in God's service. So identify the situation, decide beforehand, anticipate, remember, and exercise. These are things that will help us in temptation. That's the lesson. Good things that we can do, practical advice on how to survive temptation. Maybe you're here and you've come to know that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. You accept that. You know what God has said. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. You know what he commanded his disciples, go forth and teach men. Teach men of all nations. Those that believe and are baptized shall be saved. If we can help you in that salvation, or we can assist you in growing closer to God, just come while we stand and sing, and we'll be happy to help.